Well, who else?
Well, that's it.
In 1957, Burt Lancaster made Kirk Douglas cry in front of dozens of fans with a cruel joke. It wasn't the first time these Hollywood titans clashed, and it wouldn't be the last. For 40 years, they starred in 7 films together, fought on set, competed for roles, and pushed each other to breaking points. Today, we reveal the true story of Hollywood's most explosive friendship, and why it was destined to end in flames. Burt Lancaster was born on November 2, 1913, in a tiny apartment in Manhattan. His father worked as a postal worker, earning just $18 a week, which was barely enough to support the family of 7. They lived in a cramped space in East Harlem, a tough area filled with people from different backgrounds. Burt's grandparents had come from Ireland, and their strength and determination influenced him deeply. As a boy, he would walk with his father on mail routes, learning about hard work and the diverse city around him. Life in Harlem wasn't easy. When Burt was only 9 years old, he saw a murder happen on his street. This shocking event stayed with him forever, though he rarely spoke about it. Still, his childhood had some bright moments. He loved reading and would borrow books from the library every week, which later helped him understand the characters he played in his movies. Growing up, Burt was tough. By age 11, he was part of a gang called the Red Devils and often got into trouble. But his life changed when he discovered a community center called Union Settlement. It had a gym, and that's where Burt fell in love with gymnastics. He spent hours practicing on the bars and rings, becoming so good that he stood out. By the time he was 16, a talent scout from the circus saw him and gave him a summer job with the famous Ringling Brothers. When Burt was 19, he and his best friend, Nick Cravat, formed an acrobatic team called Lang and Cravat. They joined a small traveling circus, performing dangerous stunts like flips and somersaults without safety nets. They didn't make much money and often slept in barns, but Burt loved the excitement. Their skills got them a spot in the big Ringling Brothers circus, where they performed incredible acts on ropes and bars high above the ground. But in 1939, Burt had a terrible accident during a show. He fell 40 feet, breaking ribs and hitting his head. That accident ended his time in the circus. While recovering, Burt worked small jobs to survive. One of those jobs was as a singing waiter, where he started to see that people loved his personality and energy. In 1943, during World War II, he joined the Army. Even though he was older than most soldiers, his strength and skills made him stand out. He entertained troops by acting in shows, and for the first time, he felt the joy of performing on stage. But Burt didn't just entertain during the war. He also fought in battles, including the famous Battle of the Bulge. In one fight, he showed incredible bravery by capturing a German machine gun post by himself. This earned him an award for courage, though he rarely talked about it. After the war, Burt struggled with memories of the fighting, but those experiences helped him later in movies about war. After the war, Burt got a lucky break. A Broadway producer saw his natural talent and convinced him to try acting. At 32, Burt started his acting career with a role in a play, A Sound of Hunting. That led to a Hollywood agent, Harold Hecht, spotting him and believing Burt had potential. When Universal Studios needed an unknown actor for The Killers, Hecht got Burt an audition. The audition went badly. Burt was stiff and uncomfortable because he had zero acting experience. But the producer, Mark Hellinger, saw something special in Burt. He told the studio, "I don't care if he can act. That guy has it." Burt got the role, and when the movie came out, His performance amazed audiences. He played a boxer named Swede, a tough but tragic character. Even though Burt didn't have training, he had a raw intensity that made people love him. The movie made a lot of money, and Burt became famous instantly. He got thousands of fan letters in the first week and signed a contract for $1,000 a week, which was huge for a beginner. Burt didn't know much about acting at first, but he worked hard to learn. On his first movie set, the director had to teach him simple things, like where to stand and look during a scene. Burt paid attention and picked up everything quickly. He watched movies over and over to study other actors, like Spencer Tracy. He also learned about filmmaking by staying on set after his scenes were done, asking questions, and watching how things work. Over time, he became so good at understanding the process that he started helping with the production of his own movies. Unlike some actors who focus on deep emotions or complicated techniques, Burt had a straightforward style. He thought about what the scene needed and used his voice and body to make it work. He didn't overthink it, and that made him stand out. His rise started with his incredible ability to play different types of roles. In The Crimson Pirate, 1952, he swung from ropes, climbed ship masts, and performed amazing stunts that came from his old days as a circus acrobat. He even worked with his childhood friend Nick Cravat, who helped him make the action scenes feel real. Cravat didn't speak in the movie, not because he couldn't, but to hide his thick Brooklyn accent. The movie was colorful, exciting, and made a lot of money, turning Lancaster into someone people loved to watch. But Lancaster didn't stop there. Just 1 year later, in From Here to Eternity, 1953, he showed a completely different side of himself. He played a serious and strong Army sergeant, a role that was emotional and deep. One scene where he kissed Deborah Kerr on the beach with waves crashing around them became so famous it's still remembered today. The movie made tons of money and won 8 Oscars, including Best Picture. Lancaster's ability to switch from fun action roles to serious drama amazed everyone, and it was clear he was more than just a stuntman. Then, in 1960, he took on one of the boldest roles of his career. In Elmer Gantry, he played a preacher who was charming on the outside but full of flaws. It was a daring choice because the story dealt with topics people didn't usually talk about in movies back then. Lancaster's performance was so powerful that he won an Oscar for it. The movie also made a lot of money, proving Lancaster wasn't afraid to take risks, and that those risks paid off. But acting wasn't enough for Lancaster. He wanted control over the movies he worked on, so he started his own production company with his agent, Harold Hecht. Back then, most actors were stuck in long contracts with studios and had no control over their careers. But Burt wanted to do things his way. The company, called Hecht Hill Lancaster, made a lot of great movies in the 1950s. One of their biggest successes was Marty, 1955, a small movie that won 4 Oscars, including Best Picture. They made other films that tackled serious topics, like racism and political issues, which was rare at the time. Running the company wasn't easy. Some movies, like The Unforgiven, 1960, cost too much money and caused problems. Burt also realized that managing a business was taking time away from his acting. Although the company closed, but Burt's work had already changed Hollywood. By the 1960s, Lancaster was one of the biggest names in Hollywood. In Birdman of Alcatraz, 1962, he played a prisoner who became an expert on birds, earning another Oscar nomination. That same year, he starred in Judgment at Nuremberg, holding his own alongside some of the most famous actors of the time. He kept pushing himself, working with top directors and taking on roles that challenged him. By 1965, he was one of the highest-paid actors in the world. showing just how much people valued his talent. Burt Lancaster's career wasn't just about being a good actor. He was smart, brave, and willing to try new things. He could play a pirate, a soldier, or a flawed preacher, and make you believe every single one. He also helped change how movies were made, proving that creativity and courage could beat big budgets. His story is one of hard work, talent, and the kind of determination that makes a star truly unforgettable. In 1947, Burt Lancaster and Kirk Douglas worked together for the first time in a film called I Walk Alone. This marked the start of a partnership that would last nearly 40 years. At the time, both actors were still new to Hollywood. Lancaster had been a circus acrobat before becoming famous for his first film, The Killers, 1946. He was known for his energy and charm. Douglas had a different story. He studied acting in New York and worked hard to build his career step by step. When they were cast together, Lancaster wasn't happy at first. He thought Douglas might steal the spotlight, but this tension actually made their acting together even better. Lancaster played a man named Frankie Madison, who gets out of prison after 14 years. He was strong and rough, but also showed deep emotions. Douglas played Noel Turner, a slick nightclub owner who had betrayed Frankie. Noel was clever and confident, always staying one step ahead. Their styles were so different, and that made their scenes exciting. One powerful scene stood out. Frankie confronts Noel about the betrayal. Lancaster bursts out in anger and pain, while Douglas stays calm and sharp. They filmed the scene 19 times to get it perfect. By the end, they were both exhausted, but it turned out to be one of the best parts of the movie. Off-screen, they were very competitive. They tried to outshine each other in every scene. During a fight scene, Lancaster used his acrobat skills to suggest tricky stunts. Douglas didn't back down and insisted on doing his own moves. It took 3 days to film, and they ended up bruised and sore. But it showed how much they respected each other. When I Walk Alone came out, critics didn't love it, but audiences did. The movie made a lot of money and proved that Lancaster and Douglas were stars. When I Walk Alone was released on December 31st, 1947, critics had mixed opinions, but audiences loved it. The movie earned $2.3 million, a big success for the time. More importantly, it made Lancaster and Douglas into bankable stars and showed how powerful their pairing could be. This film set the stage for their next collaboration, Gunfight at the OK Corral, which solidified their status as one of Hollywood's best on-screen duos. Burt Lancaster's role as Wyatt Earp made him a star. He was tall and strong, standing at 6 feet 2 inches, which made him perfect for the role of a serious and fearless lawman. In the movie, Lancaster worked with Kirk Douglas, who played Doc Holliday. Their partnership was unforgettable. Lancaster was calm and controlled, while Douglas was fiery and unpredictable. Together, they made every scene more powerful. One moment that stood out was when Earp and Holliday faced a room full of cowboys. Lancaster said, "You can stay, and you can play on one condition: no knives, no guns, and no killings." His serious tone made the line one of the most famous in the film. Behind the scenes, Lancaster even argued over the type of hat Wyatt Earp should wear. He won the argument and wore a flat-brimmed hat that became part of the character's iconic look. A behind-the-scenes moment that became legendary happened during filming on August 17, 1956. Lancaster and Douglas had a laughing fit while shooting a tense saloon scene. In the scene, Earp is unarmed and surrounded by cowboys until Holliday tosses him a gun, and together they take control of the room. The absurdity of their characters' bravado hit both actors, and they couldn't stop laughing. Director John Sturges tried everything to get them back on track, even filming them separately, but just seeing each other off-camera reignited their laughter. The delay cost the studio $25,000, but the story became part of the film's publicity. Ironically, the final scene turned out to be one of the most intense in the movie, proving the actor's ability to deliver under pressure. Another surprising incident happened at a fan event on June 23, 1957, where Lancaster teased Douglas about his height. Lancaster, being much taller at 6 feet 2 inches, joked that Douglas, at 5 feet 7 inches, wore lifts in his shoes to appear taller on screen. While their banter was usually lighthearted this time, it upset Douglas, who turned red and, to everyone's shock, burst into tears. Lancaster quickly tried to apologize, but Douglas left the event. This moment revealed Douglas's hidden insecurities about his height, something he later admitted had bothered him since childhood. Their friendship cooled for a while, but recovered years later during their work on 7 Days in May 1964. Douglas even wrote about the incident in his autobiography, sharing how deeply it had affected him. When Gunfight at the OK Corral premiered on May 30, 1957, it was a major success. It earned over $11 million on a $2 million budget and solidified Lancaster and Douglas as one of Hollywood's favorite duos. The climactic 30-minute gunfight was especially praised, taking 18 days to film and using more than 5,000 blank cartridges to achieve its gritty realism. Critics loved the movie, and it received 2 Academy Award nominations for Best Editing and Best Sound. Burt Lancaster took a big risk in his career when he played a Sicilian prince in The Leopard, 1963. People didn't believe an American could pull off the role, but he proved them wrong. He changed his appearance completely, gaining weight and dyeing his hair gray to look like the aging prince. Even though he didn't speak Italian, he worked hard to learn the lines phonetically and spoke them so convincingly that Italian audiences thought he was fluent. He spent months in Italy, learning about Sicilian culture and working with a coach to get the accent right. The movie itself was huge. It cost $5 million, which would be around $45 million today. They built a whole Sicilian village and hired 5,000 extras for a grand ball scene. Lancaster even did his own stunts, including dancing for 6 hours straight in the ball sequence. When the movie premiered at the Cannes Film Festival, it was 205 minutes long and became one of his best performances, silencing all the doubters. A year later, Lancaster worked with Kirk Douglas in 7 Days in May 1964, a film about a military plot to overthrow the U.S. government. This was their 7th movie together, and their chemistry was clear. The film's story was controversial, and the Department of Defense didn't want to help with it. But President John F. Kennedy supported the movie because he had read the book it was based on. He even let the crew film outside the White House. Lancaster played a tough general, inspired by real-life military figures, and he gave a powerful performance. One scene with Douglas lasted over 7 minutes without a single cut, showing how intense their acting was. The movie cost $2.2 million, a big amount for a black-and-white film, but it earned back $3.65 million and was a hit. People loved its story about the dangers of military power, especially since it came out shortly after the Cuban Missile Crisis. Critics praised Lancaster and Douglas, and the film got 2 Oscar nominations. This role proved Lancaster was not afraid to take on serious and risky projects, and it made his reputation as an actor even stronger. As Burt Lancaster grew older, his career changed in an exciting way. In the 1980s, he stopped being the usual leading man and started playing more unique and complicated roles. One of his first big changes came with Atlantic City in 1980. He played Lou Pascal, an old gangster who felt left behind in a changing world. The role was emotional and powerful, earning him an Academy Award nomination. It showed that even though he was aging, he could still bring something special to the screen. After Atlantic City, Burt kept surprising everyone with his choices. In Local Hero, 1983, he was Felix Happer, a quirky boss of an oil company, in a story that mixed comedy and heartfelt moments. Then, in 1985, he starred in Scandal Sheet, where he was a tough tabloid editor. The role reminded people of his earlier gritty movies, but had more depth because of his age and experience. In 1986, he took on an international project called Control, playing a CIA agent in a Cold War spy story. While the movie wasn't well known, it showed how fearless Burt was, even as he got older. In 1987, he gave a touching performance in Rocket Gibraltar, playing a grandfather gathering his family for his birthday. The story was about family, love, and growing old, and Burt handled it beautifully. Out of all his later roles, two stand out the most. In Atlantic City, his performance was unforgettable. He brought so much emotion to Lou Pascal, showing how hard it is to let go of the past. His scenes with Susan Sarandon were full of chemistry, and one moment, where he washes money with lemons, became iconic. Then, in Field of Dreams, 1989, Burt appeared briefly as Dr. Moonlight Graham. He didn't have much screen time, but his role was one of the most moving parts of the film. Playing a man who gave up baseball to become a doctor, he delivered a line that stuck with everyone. We just don't recognize the most significant moments of our lives while they're happening. It was a small role, but it was so powerful that it left a big impact. Burt also reunited with Kirk Douglas in 1986 for Tough Guys. It was the last time the two legendary actors worked together. They played old friends trying to adjust to life after spending decades in prison. The movie had action, humor, and even some heartfelt moments. Burt and Kirk performed many of their own stunts, even hijacking a train in one wild scene. Fans loved seeing them together again, even if the movie itself wasn't a huge hit. Burt's later years weren't easy because of his health. In 1983, he had major heart surgery, but quickly returned to acting. During the filming of Rocket Gibraltar, he needed emergency surgery for a gallbladder attack. Even though doctors told him to rest, he was back on set in just 10 days. His determination showed how much he loved acting. One of his last big projects was the TV miniseries Separate But Equal in 1991. Even though a stroke during filming made it hard for him to speak, Burt worked with a therapist and finished the role. His health problems eventually made him retire, but Burt's dedication to his craft never faded. He had always pushed through challenges to give his best performances. Burt Lancaster's life off-screen was as full of drama as his movies. He got married 3 times and had 5 children. His first marriage was to June Ernst in 1935. This was during his early days as a circus acrobat. The marriage ended in 1946, just as Burt became a Hollywood star with his role in The Killers. After that, he married Norma Anderson. They stayed together from 1946 to 1969, and during that time, they had 5 children: Bill, James, Susan, Joanna, and Sehil. But their marriage wasn't happy. When Burt and Norma got married, she was already pregnant with their first child. To protect Burt's image as a Hollywood heartthrob, the studio claimed Norma was a young war widow. This lie was just the beginning of their troubles. Burt had many affairs while he was married to Norma. He was romantically involved with some of his co-stars, like Marlene Dietrich and, allegedly, Deborah Kerr, during the filming of From Here to Eternity. Norma eventually filed for divorce in 1969, citing extreme cruelty. She won custody of their youngest children and received a large share of their wealth, valued at over $2 million. Years later, Burt married again. In 1990, at the age of 77, he married Susan Martin after dating her for 5 years. They stayed together until Burt's death in 1994. Even then, his ex-wife Norma still considered herself married to him because of her Catholic faith. Burt was a very private man, even though he was one of Hollywood's biggest stars. He didn't like talking about his personal life, even with his own children. His son Bill once said Burt wasn't the most open or communicative father. This distance may have come from Burt's tough childhood in a poor neighborhood in New York. He learned to work hard and stay focused, but kept his emotions to himself. Over the years, rumors spread about Burt's sexuality. Some people speculated he might be gay or bisexual. Burt never addressed these rumors, which only made people more curious. Burt wasn't just an actor. He was also very active in politics. He was passionate about civil rights and marched with Martin Luther King Jr. in Washington in 1963. He supported King financially and stayed committed to fighting for equality. Burt also campaigned for George McGovern during the 1972 presidential election. His activism even landed him on President Nixon's enemies list. Burt's political views often influenced the roles he chose, like his performance in Elmer Gantry, where he played a corrupt preacher to criticize figures like Billy Graham. Burt Lancaster changed how people saw actors. He wasn't just about looks or charm. He brought action, emotion, and depth to his roles. His career lasted over 40 years, from 1946 to 1989, and during that time, he inspired many actors to work harder and take risks. Lancaster was athletic because he used to be a circus acrobat. This made him stand out in action movies. In The Crimson Pirate, 1952, he did his own stunts, something most actors didn't do back then. Actors like Tom Cruise and Jackie Chan would later follow his example. But he wasn't just about stunts. In Sweet Smell of Success, 1957, he played a cruel gossip writer, showing that a leading man could be more than just a hero. This performance influenced actors like Robert De Niro and Al Pacino, who later became famous for playing complex characters. Lancaster passed away on October 20, 1994, at age 80. His last years were tough. In 1990, he had a stroke that left him partly paralyzed and unable to speak. Still, he kept trying to get better. In October 1994, he had a heart attack at home in Los Angeles. His wife, Susie, was with him, but he couldn't be saved. His death shocked Hollywood and fans around the world. His final role was in 1989 in The Phantom of the Opera. Even though it wasn't as famous as his earlier work, it showed how dedicated he was to acting, even in his last years. After his stroke, he couldn't act anymore, ending a career that had lasted nearly 5 decades. Burt Lancaster had a special friendship with Kirk Douglas. They met in 1946 and made 7 movies together, including Gunfight at the OK Corral, 1957. They were friends, but also competitors, always trying to outdo each other. This pushed both of them to do their best. Douglas once joked that they both wanted to be Hollywood's biggest star. They even worked on a stage play together in 1981, showing how much they respected each other. When Lancaster died, many people shared their memories of him. Kirk Douglas called him a giant and said he would never truly be gone because his performances would live forever. Sidney Poitier praised him for standing up for civil rights. Director Louis Malle, who worked with Lancaster in Atlantic City, 1980, said Lancaster brought incredible energy to every role, even when he was older. These stories showed that Burt Lancaster wasn't just a great actor. He was a person who cared about others and always gave his best. His impact on Hollywood and the world is still felt today.